Welcome to the archive. In today's episode, we had a very profound conversation with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, and I know I speak for BJ and myself when I say it was extremely impactful on both of us.
Absolutely.
If you don't already know, Rabbi Simon Jacobson is the author of Toward a Meaningful Life, founder of the Meaningful Life Center, and publisher of the Yiddish English Weekly. Rabbi Simon Jacobson is also an extremely prolific YouTuber, and you can find him at his website or on his YouTube channel, which we will post the links to in the description below.
Thank you, Connor, for that wonderful introduction. With that, let's jump right in. Hello, Simon.
Hi, guys. How are you?
Doing well. Thank you so much for coming onto our channel. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you for your time. Today, we have a couple of questions. The first section of what we want to ask you about is dealing with Kabbalah in general. Coming from a non-Jewish perspective, neither of us are actually Orthodox or practicing Jews, but we do have an interest in Orthodoxy, major world religions, as well as personally, I've been trying to study Kabbalah from a layman's perspective for a few years. Personally, I've been studying some Hebrew, trying to understand it from a proper perspective as well as I can without actually converting. The second part is I have some questions for you on language and the Hebrew language in general, a couple of nuanced questions. Again, as I'm learning Hebrew, I have no teacher, so it'd be great if you could clear some things up for me. And then together, we also wanted to ask you a couple of things in general relative to Judaism and not Kabbalah.
Sure. Here we are. My pleasure and honor to be with you and try to answer your questions to the best of my ability.
Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So the first question that we have for you is, for our viewers, can you please define Kabbalah in brief? I know it's kind of a loaded question. I always settle to answer with tradition or receiving, and I use the metaphor of giving while receiving, such that God can behold God. But do you have a good, concise way you might define Kabbalah for people who have no idea what it is?
Absolutely. The very word, as you just said, Kabbalah means to receive. It's to receive. That's what it means, to reception, which has two implications. One is that to be able to appreciate and study Kabbalah, you need to be someone that receives it from a master, a mentor before you. In other words, you can't just sit down and read a book. You need a teacher, just like you need a master musician to teach you how to play music, a master student of Kabbalah, of mysticism, that you receive from. And the second point, which is even more intriguing, is you need to be in a receptive mode. If your ego is too dominant and you're too filled with yourself, you won't be able to receive well. It's like you need to have an empty cup to be able to receive. You have to empty yourself of your identity and be a channel to a truth that's greater than we are. So Kabbalah is essentially, another way of putting it, is the soul of life. You know, there are things that talk about the mechanics, like you have a body and you have a soul. The soul, the inner workings of the cosmos, you can call it the spiritual DNA and building blocks of existence and what makes each one of us tick. So the study of Kabbalah is actually about understanding an X-ray, a CAT scan of your spiritual DNA.
It's beautiful. Thank you for that. I've heard it described as well as sort of like giving back to God in the reception of the truth. Is that at all resonate with you? It's almost like in the act of giving, you also give to God.
Well, Kabbalah means to receive, not to give. When you're in receptive mode, you obviously give back to the one you're receiving from. When a student is receiving from a teacher, or in this case, you're ready to receive and to absorb. Another good word is absorb and retain a higher truth, a higher state of consciousness. Then obviously you give back as well.
Perfect. Well, thank you for that. And it's an oral tradition, as you said. It's passed on from teacher to student. Usually, traditionally, it's been one-to-one, right? Is that normally the case? It's usually one-to-one?
To preserve the integrity of the original, it's like very difficult to teach it in mass, because in a group form.
Truly.
So it's taught because there are many nuances and subtleties, and you want to have that personalization. It's like intimacy in a form of, it's an intimate study, and therefore it was always in smaller groups. Now, I should add, it's been documented. There are books on Kabbalah today, but to really appreciate it, you need a teacher to teach you those texts.
Thank you for that. We have some more questions in a bit that will touch on some points that you just made as well. Connor, I think you have a question.
Yeah, well, I haven't been studying Kabbalah as long as BJ. BJ actually was the one who put me onto it, but he did lend me a book called The Essential Kabbalah. And one of the claims that they made in the book was that Kabbalah, in some sense, was an attempt to revert back to the ways of thinking that are pre-rational, maybe mythically minded man was in touch with. And I was just thinking to myself, well, I would love to ask a rabbi that, and kind of synchronistically, you agreed to come on our show. So I was just wondering if that resonates with you. Do you believe that Kabbalah is the predecessor to all of spirituality and all mysticism and whatnot?
Yeah, I wouldn't use the word mythical, because myth to me sounds like fantasy and not supernatural, and things that are supernatural and superstitious. But I would say, yes, what has happened in history, basically, once the world became industrialized and things became very commercial and money-based, sometimes you lose touch with the spirit of things. And we see that today. How often do we have a heart-to-heart, soul-to-soul conversation? So Kabbalah is, yes, going back to the primal and the core way of communicating, heart-to-heart, soul-to-soul, soulful language. That's why the word soul very much associates with music. Music is like the language of Kabbalah. It's the music of our souls.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, that's interesting.
So I have a question on, because Kabbalah, as you stated, should be passed on from person to person with a reverence and a respect for the sacred. Was it Baal Shem Tov who made it public? I guess my question is, when did Kabbalah become publicized? I know through my study historically that there was a period of time, I believe maybe in 15 to 1700, somewhere around there, probably in Spain. I don't know the name of someone who it became more public, and then because of that event, the false messiah showed up, right? And that's why there are certain rules and stipulations now for some period in time in which you had to be 40 years old and have a family, and kind of check off the boxes, be a practicing Jew, and hold the commandments, and practice all of the rules of the Torah and everything. That all happened because of this occurrence, correct? Of like it becoming publicized and being bastardized over time. The knowledge?
Not exactly. I would correct a few of those points, if I may.
Yeah, please do. Thank you.
Look, every wisdom, whether it's mathematics, physics, sciences, as well as and especially more mystical teachings and metaphysical ones, always have the risk of being abused and misunderstood. The reason it was always taught very carefully was because it was like a hidden art. Like I said before, like people who are artists, musicians, they pass it on student to teacher. The reason in the 16th century came a man called Rabbi Isaac Luria in Tzfat, northern Israel, and he and other colleagues of his recognized that the time has come to begin to publicize these teachings for two reasons. One, because the spiritual darkness of the modern world was becoming very powerful. And they felt that it was necessary to reveal some of the more inner secrets so people can maintain the integrity and their connection. When you have to compete with all the different isms, and whether the birth of socialism or the birth of capitalism, Marxism, and other different schools of thought, so essentially they had to then reveal these teachings to maintain that spiritual connection. Look how many people today have difficulty finding a spiritual path. So recognizing the changes happening in the world around them, they felt that was important now to begin to let more people know about it. Even though, yes, there was the risk that some people may not appreciate it. A second point is, from a Kabbalistic point of view, the world is constantly evolving to a more perfect and more refined state. And what we call the Messianic age, the age of redemption. Some people call it the age of Aquarius, many utopia, and so on. So as we get closer to that age, the Kabbalists felt that we're now ready to get a taste of some of these inner wisdom and the inner teachings, because it's like a foretaste of what is coming. And as the world basically evolves from the agricultural revolution to the industrial revolution to the computer revolution, that ultimately the final revolution would be a spiritual one. So to prepare people for that, they began to teach these teachings widely. Now, yes, as a result, there's always the risk, and there was misunderstanding, and there were people who abused it, and there was what you're referring to as Shabtai Tzvi, a false messiah. But it wasn't per se only because of the revelation of Kabbalah. It was in general. He took advantage, and he was a con artist.
Okay.
And ultimately, he was exposed. But so the teachings are always, we always take care how you teach, and we do it the best we can. And today, it's actually very public. The teachings of Kabbalah and Hasidic thought have reached millions of people now.
They have. Yes, thank you. I can tell you're quite passionate about it, which I highly respect. I see a lot of confusion. Kabbalah has been reskinned, taken advantage of through, the Golden Dawn magical tradition. Some people attribute
and also feeds into sensationalism, to be very honest. People like sensationalism, the exotic, the unknown. I mean,
exactly.
You have to remember, Kabbalah comes down to a simple thing. It's about not just a mechanical action or ritual. It's about the spiritual connection you have to it. Like, in other words, I'll just give you an example. We all understand the obligation and the responsibility to give charity, right? To be kind, and if you're blessed with something, to share with another. What the Kabbalah will teach, that when you give charity, you're actually exercising that spiritual muscle called chesed, called love within you. And it talks about the dynamics of your own spirituality growing and being cultivated and blossoming. So it's about really coming to express the spirit and the soul within everything we do and our lives, the deeper purpose of our lives, and so on. So when you really start explaining it, it's not quite as sensationalistic, like some people want to know whether they reincarnated. The key, the bottom line is Kabbalah is supposed to evoke more responsibility. It's not escape into some psychedelic high. Something.
Right, which I see. Sorry, Connor, just to finish up this thought, I have seen that. That's why originally it was a study of Freemasonry and Freemasonic concepts that had led me more towards actual true Kabbalah, which is why I've been trying to learn Hebrew and find a teacher, just because I have so many questions. But Freemasonry kept that heart, I think, of trying to better the world, better the self, but it was so riddled with so much extra, and it takes you down all these paths which have nothing to do with real traditional Kabbalah. And so that's kind of why I'm asking these questions, because of course there are so many reskinnings and so many bastardizations and misrepresentations of it, people using it for their own gain, black magic and these sorts of things. And my final question on this light was, in the Orthodox community, is there something being done actively, or is it sort of something you don't talk about too much, or is it something you're passionate about, but it's like you can't really do a whole lot to stop it? I mean, is there a movement that the Orthodoxy is attempting to rectify at all? Like, do you have an answer for that?
That was just real quick. I just want to interject. That was kind of what I was going to say too, is like, I don't know if there's any other concerns outside of con artistry and sensationalism, but what can someone who doesn't have a teacher do to prevent themselves from falling into those traps of distortion?
Or being damaged, right?
Or being damaged.
It can be dangerous for someone to try to learn and practice these things.
Well, the good news is, because of technology, you have many good teachers online. The question is, who's the right one?
Right.
And which write books. So the fact is, it's good to get it known, try to find the right person with good referrals. I'll just tell you one litmus test. A true Kabbalist is a very humble person. If anyone's trying to commercialize it and make money, or you find something else that rubs you the wrong way, stay away.
Okay.
It's going to come down to humility. There's even an interesting expression that Kabbalists say, that those that know don't say, and those that say don't know.
Yes, sir.
So a true Kabbalist is not going to go out there and say, hey, I'm a Kabbalist, come to me. They'll be very low key. They'll be very understated, no ears about them. So that's important to understand, that you're dealing with truth that should be resonating.
Yeah.
And so I would recommend to anyone, look for that humble teacher, try to find a friend of a friend, or try to find someone that you trust that's an expert. It's like a therapist. Some therapists are terrible, Right. So ultimately it's trial and error. And trust your instincts at times, but also trust some individuals that you feel are legitimate and authentic, and And that's how I would advise. And there are some good stuff out there. There are good books. There are good teachers, but you have to be careful. That's correct.
So I began with Ari Kaplan, in Sefer Yetzirah and some other texts that were written or translated, I suppose, by Arya. And I see what you're talking about in the world. Tony Kozanek, I think he's part of the Kabbalah Center. There were some good ideas there and things that I was learning. I know that there's some contempt for the Kabbalah Center, and I think it's Berg is the name. So I don't want to put any names out there and have you be associated with any sort of like talking smack about anyone, but I do appreciate the advice and seeking within for what resonates and sounds true. That's a struggle of mine. I live in Idaho. We both are in Boise, the capital city. And it makes it difficult for me to know where to go to speak to people, as well as I'm always worried that as an outsider who's not part of the community, who wasn't raised in an Orthodox household, might not be welcomed as much to learn any of these things. Although, as you said, Kabbalah has been, the gates have been opened for the most part to the Gentile, to regular Joe Schmo people, as we are all working towards making the world better. I'm always seeking for that humble connection with someone, and it's very difficult. So things like this between you and us means the world to me personally. So thank you so much again.
So I will say this. I think what we can do here, coupled with this discussion we're having, perhaps if you send us a message, I could send you some suggested reading and some good sites that discuss Kabbalah in a legitimate way, so you can share it with yourself and with others, that here are some bona fide, authentic Kabbalistic teachings, and including Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan's books. There's Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz wrote a very good book on Kabbalah called The 13-Petaled Rose. I have written some Kabbalistic works, Spiritual Guide to Counting the Omer, but we can actually make a list. And great. That way people can go to different links and they'll be well recommended. And I'm ready to vouch for some. The ones I have doubts about, we don't have to present, but that's a very good idea.
Wonderful. I would greatly appreciate that.
Absolutely.
I've been studying for a long time, and I've tried to sift through what I feel to be nonsensical and corrupt, and some things that are true. And I've gained a lot of knowledge, but now I want to actually practice and really start making real moves towards making that connection. So I really appreciate everything that you've said so far.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there are good teachers out there. There are, we have to find them, but they are. Even in Idaho, I have to think of which rabbi I may recommend. But there are people. And remember, today, with technology, you're just one button away from anyone.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah, it's beautiful, honestly. The balance is beautiful.
You don't have to be lucky enough to have somebody in your community who happens to be there.
Yes. So that leads me to a question. It's kind of out of left field, but it's about authenticity and authorship. So I know the Zohar is one of the pertinent Kabbalistic texts. It's very important, very well regarded. But the history of how the Zohar was written, how it came to light, I have a question about that hasn't been able to be answered well, which is there is a lot of contention around Moses de Leon and I think Shimon Bar Yochai, right? And whether or not this is truly a piece of literature from antiquity or if it was like a forgery. Does authenticity and authorship matter at all when learning these concepts? Of course, it sounds like it doesn't, because the Zohar is so important to the Orthodox community. But I guess, is it like you said earlier, is it just searching for the truth? It doesn't matter who says it or where it comes from or how it's presented. It's just about the truth that underlies it. Is that why it's been accepted so greatly, even though it's kind of...
Well, first of all, the truth does matter, because if it's forged or if it's illegitimate, doesn't matter what it says there. That itself is a problem.
Right.
So let me respond. The reason the Zohar has been accepted as the classical work is because experts in mysticism, when they saw the writings of the Zohar, it is true perhaps that Moses de Leon was the first publisher of it. But when there was the controversy was primarily by the ignorant. The scholars all recognized ideas because they had heard it from their teachers and the teachers of their teachers. So when it was discovered in the 15th century in the caves in two different places, if you're familiar, one is Mantoba and one is Cremona, both in Italy. So manuscripts were discovered in different caves. When the people who discovered them didn't know what they were. So they showed them around to different rabbis because they were in Hebrew, Aramaic, but Hebrew letters. And some didn't know what it was. Then they showed it to some big experts and they said, wow, we know exactly what this is. So it wasn't like Moses de Leon. Remember, you have to remember the Jews throughout history are great scholars. You can't just pull one on a scholar. We're not talking about the Zohar was accepted by the ignorant ones. So the great scholars said this is called the Zohar. And they already had it cited from their teachers, even in writing, but no one had seen the full text.
Oh.
So that's what happened.
Okay.
So, however, that doesn't, obviously when it was published, there were different manuscripts, they had to compare them and so on and so forth. So the Zohar's ideas were already known long before the 15th century. They go back to the times of the Talmud, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and so on. So that's the reason it has that legitimacy, because those scholars, one after the other, and I can name you names, people who, like, imagine the biggest, greatest medical doctor in the world would tell you, this is a medical formula that I heard about it from my teachers. It gives it a very different credibility.
So would it be accurate to say that maybe instead of being a revelation, it was more just a good codification of a bunch of Kabbalistic ideas?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you something more. The Jewish scholars throughout history, there's a built-in immune system. How do you know if something is a forgery? Let's say somebody right now in the 21st century discovers some manuscript in an Egyptian cave or somewhere in Europe. How do we know if it's legitimate or not? So there are many ways, there are built-in ways to figure it out. You have to show it to people who are great scholars. They can find out, not just whether the parchment was faked or the language, but the ideas. So you must go to a scholar. The bottom line is only a scholar can know if this is a legitimate text or not.
Absolutely.
And I can tell you, there have been texts that, for example, in the 18th, 19th century, someone came up with a text and claimed it was a new section of the Talmud. And quickly, within a few months, it was debunked because the real experts said, what are you talking about? It was never referred to. No one ever heard of it.
Right.
There are ways to figure it out. You can fool people who are ignorant. You can't fool a scholar.
Right. Well, I appreciate that, because I have read about it and it didn't make a whole lot of sense. Although most of the argument online that I've read or in books is that it's the truth underneath it that was recognized. And I really appreciate your answer. It was very cogent. So thank you.
Sure.
One thing that I wanted to ask you, because, there's been a really recent rise in interest in the Hebrew Bible. And I think a lot of that can be attributed to Jordan Peterson's lectures on the psychological significance of the Torah. And I was just wondering if you have any thought or comment on those, or if they resonated with you in any way.
Or if you even know who Jordan Peterson is or have heard of his lecture series.
Of course, I've heard of, I know Jordan Peterson. Look, I don't know if you ever heard the book called the Hebrew Republic.
No, sir.
Yeah, the fact is, look, number one is Christianity grew out of Judaism.
Right.
So the fact is, the Old Testament, as it's called in Christianity, is the Bible. Right. The Bible are truths that really, in many ways, are the basis of this country, this republic's foundations. All men are created equal, endowed by the Creator with unalienable rights. So the ideas, the universal themes of the Bible have resonated throughout history. The thing is, it was usually before technology, before the printing press, before technology, it wasn't really widely known. In the book called The Hebrew Republic, he makes the case that was when the King James Bible, the translation of the Bible was translated into English from the Hebrew, suddenly it exposed ideas that the mainstream were not aware of. So I'm not surprised at all. Remember, the Bible shaped Christianity, it shaped Islam. So basically, you're talking about almost 4 billion people on this earth, combining Christians and Muslims, really follow principles in the Bible. The Bible has become mainstream in many ways. It's the best-selling book. It's not even recorded in the New York Times bestseller list because it sells so many books.
Right.
Yeah, I think
which is another interesting phenomenon. So I'm not surprised at all. The Bible's ideas, the ideas of good and evil, the story of the tree of knowledge, the story of Exodus. How many films have been made about the 10 Commandments? Cecil B. DeMille's Ten Commandments. So the popularization of the themes of the Bible have always been with us. So I'm not surprised at all. So now it's really become very popular, and I think it will only grow in popularity because people go back. Often you go back to the original truths of our ancestors to really cut to the chase, especially when you have all the confusion and the polarization of politics and so on.
Sir.
Yeah. You want to find what are the essential truths. So the ideas of the Ten Commandments, or what they call the universal Noahide laws, remain the bedrock of civilization.
Mm-hmm.
Thou shalt not murder, thou shalt not steal, respect another person's life and property, respect the sanctity of sexuality, have a system of law and order. These are principles that have become, they're not even considered religious anymore in many ways.
Right.
They become, this is what makes us human beings that pursue justice and virtue. This was not the case hundreds of years ago. Today, the concept of charity and giving has become very popular. In the United States itself, how much charity is distributed? You're talking about the billions and billions of dollars, if not trillions.
Right.
Yes, indeed. And that I agree with 100% and resonate with just how the Bible, Old or New Testament, whatever, it doesn't even matter how you look at it, has changed the whole world across time. And one of the reasons why I wanted to learn Hebrew is just because so much was lost, I think, in the Christian. I know that some people in the Jewish community feel negatively about how Christianity has taken and borrowed and changed, and changing things from Hebrew, you lose the gematria, you lose the sod, you lose everything underneath, all of the hidden meaning, all of the branching paths. And that is one of the huge reasons why I respect the codification of the information in the Hebrew language, and why I want to learn it so badly, so I can truly study and understand these things. So I appreciate that. Again, thank you.
I'll tell you an interesting anecdote if you allow me to.
Please do.
Michelangelo, we all know Michelangelo, the great sculptor in Italy. So, when he sculpted the Sistine Chapel, so, up on the ceiling, you have this beautiful, all the biblical characters. So there's actually a book I have, I think it's called The Secrets of the Sistine Chapel. There are many things there that he went to study with Jewish scholars in the original Hebrew because he wanted it to be accurate.
Yes.
And one of the interesting things is most people think that the tree of knowledge and the biblical tree of knowledge was an apple tree. You have Adam's apple, the forbidden apple, the apple, right? It was not an apple. There were 4 different opinions. And Michelangelo, when he drew the tree of knowledge, he followed the biblical tradition that it was a fig tree. Fig. And if you look, it's not apples, it's figs. And all scholars wonder, how did he know that? When all the Christians said it was apple. And it was because he studied the original Hebrew, where when you read it properly, you see that it was either a fig tree, there are other opinions, but not an apple, just for the record.
Okay.
Interesting.
Well, that actually skips ahead. I was going to later on ask a question about the tree of life, the tree of life itself being, I've heard people argue that it's the acacia tree. Have you ever heard of the acacia tree being
Yes,
argued?
I have. I'll tell you the truth. I know more about the tree of knowledge than the tree of life because it's more controversial.
It is. And there's not a lot that I've read on the tree of knowledge, actually. Mostly it's always like, let's talk about the tree of life. Let's talk about the tree of life. Or, everyone's
I'll tell you, I'd have to look that up, but it could be the tree of knowledge. I know there are 4 opinions. But go ahead. I'll follow your questions when.
Oh no! So I mean, I'm interested in anything, honestly, that you have to say. Where can I find more information about the Tree of Knowledge? Do you have any a good book?
Yes, if you go to my site, meaningfullife.com, just write Tree of Knowledge, and there's a whole article there about the different opinions and what they mean.
Perfect. Thank you so much, and we'll post a link to that as well in the video. So. Lurianic Kabbalah, you mentioned Isaac Luria. And Isaac Luria is the one who changed the paradigm of thought a little bit. If I'm not mistaken, he spoke about God making a quote unquote like a mistake. Not to say that God is not perfect or whatever, not to make assumptions. I read and heard that Luria stated that God made a mistake in creating the Sefirot, and some of the Sefirot broke, right? Because he created what are the faces, the the Zeranpin and some of the other like long face, short face.
The
The
Partsufim,
Partsufim, thank you, the Partsufim, and that changed the game for a lot of Kabbalists, correct? Can you shed some light on what happened historically?
I don't mean to contradict you, but I'm not sure what your sources are. I don't know anywhere where the Isaac Luria says God made a mistake. So this is a misreading by somebody and a misinterpretation, just for the record.
Okay.
Which is just a great example of how much distortion there is in the field.
Exactly.
There's a ton.
Exactly.
And
it's actually a far more fascinating concept than a mistake.
Right.
Actually quite deliberate. What happened was like this. The way the Lurianic Kabbalah explains it, and by the way, all Kabbalists received from those before him. Isaac Luria was definitely a revolutionary, but he did not come up with his own ideas. These are ideas that are already there in the Zohar, but they were very cryptic. And he knew how to interpret it based on what he had received from his teachers.
Okay.
Let me just clarify that as well. So here's what the picture, give you I'll put it in more contemporary terms to make it a little more palatable, I should say. And that is that we have a philosophical dilemma. And that is that if God is all-encompassing and omnipresent, then where is there room for an independent consciousness like ourselves?
Right.
You and I, we're speaking right now, we have an independent ego, an independent self. And God wanted an independent consciousness for existence to exist. You can't have God, everything submerged in a higher divine consciousness.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. So we could say that it's a mystery and God does whatever he wants. It doesn't tell us how he does it. Or, as Rabbi Isaac Luria says, God did create a logical structure for us to understand. And what he calls is the great Tzimtzum. Tzimtzum is that the divine consciousness, not the divine essence, the consciousness, the revealed consciousness was concealed. Think of it like a teacher, a brilliant teacher who conceals his intelligence in order to be able to communicate to a student. Because if the intelligence just flows without any restrictions, without any limits, we'd all be overwhelmed.
Right. So fry your circuits.
What?
Fry your circuits.
Right. So God's consciousness was concealed, but now we have another problem. There's now a dissonance between the reality of the independent consciousness and the divine consciousness. They need to come to terms with each other, because the truth is, beneath the surface of reality, meaning our reality, we are all connected. There's an inner intrinsic divine unity that connects us all. At the same time, we don't feel it. So there's a dissonance that needs to be resolved. So what Isaac Luria explains, that there's a state where this gives. It's like, when you have a lot of built up pressure and tension within you, somewhere there's going to be an explosion. And he calls this the world of Tohu, the world of chaos, referred to in the second verse in Genesis, Tohu, which is the place where he says the dissonance comes to a head, and think of it like a market correction. So there's what he calls the shattering of the containers, that the energy is too intense for the containers to contain. So there's a shattering, which is quite deliberate. It was not a mistake. It was meant to be.
Okay.
In order, it's like, why an earthquake takes place? Because the crusts of the Earth's plates, the tectonic plates, they begin to rub against each other. So in order to relieve the tension, there's an earthquake. The same thing here. To relieve the tension, there was the shattering of the containers. Think of it like this way. Let's say you grew up, God forbid, somebody grows up in a home, a very dysfunctional home that really was abusive and so on. And the child swallowed it. At some point, it's going to give. Either it'll be an outburst of anger, it may be destructive behavior, it may be dysfunctionality of one sort or another, it may be hurting other people. So there has to be so-called a protest that something is wrong, something is off. So the shattering of the containers that you're referring to is really a stepping stone that it shatters in order to be repaired. And hence we have the concept of tikkun olam, repairing that crack and that break.
Okay, thank you. Because I am familiar with the Tzimtzum circle and Kav and the concept of the klipot. And
okay, so
I just
giving some explanation to it.
It
needs to be explained because there are a lot of texts out there that are not doing justice to it. There's distortions. It's not explained properly.
Right. One such thing that causes confusion for me is this guy, his name's David Chaim Smith. You may be familiar, potentially. David Chaim Smith. He wrote this text, actually. I have it here. It's called Deep Principles of Kabbalistic Alchemy. He tries to conjoin and combine alchemical ideas with Kabbalah, and he talks much about these concepts. That's not the source that I got the idea of the mistake from, but
for me, I'd like to see what his Kabbalah sounds like, if it's legitimate. Maybe he's just a dabbler in it. Anybody can look a book of physics and suddenly call himself a physicist.
Right.
It's very compelling. I'll send a link to you just so you can look at it. Maybe you can tell me what you think about it if you can review it. But thank you so much for that. Again, I don't like using the word mistake either. It leaves like a bad taste in my mouth. I didn't think that God would make a mistake. It's just the shattering of the sphere of the energy not being able to be contained.
It'd be like if you want to build a new structure, sometimes you have to raise with a Z the old structure. So if you came and saw a construction site and you see them pulling down a building, you'd say, why would anyone pull down a building? But you know what? You're pulling it down in order to rebuild it. So think of it that way.
Exactly. And so that's in the Tree of Life, that's the descent and then the ascent back up. Like that's the whole, that came from Luria, that whole concept of the return. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you so much. So that ends the actual questions that I have directly in Kabbalah for now. That kind of leads us over to asking about the language of Hebrew. Again, it's a huge thing. I don't have a teacher. I'm just learning through all the sources, and it's hard. I know that due to all of the diasporas and the subjugation of the Jews and their disenfranchisement, their slavery over the course of time, the true way to speak the language, I feel, has been said to have been lost or forgotten. It is an old language. And I was wondering if you could shed some light on this contention between how certain letters are supposed to be pronounced, if there is or isn't a consensus on how. For instance, Vav, some people arguing that it's Waw, or like Ayin, people not remembering how to pronounce Ayin properly, or if you do, you just don't, because in contemporary Hebrew, it would sound like you were trying too hard to be cool, or trying too hard to sound like you're like this mystical person. Can you shed some light on how these letters should actually be pronounced, or even if there is a consensus? Is it just a confusion for most people?
Or whether or not you think it is pertinent?
Yeah. Language is, of course, a tremendously important subject, because when you're conveying ideas, you want to make sure the right language was used. We all know the game telephone, that if I whisper in your ear and I say the word, let's say apple, by the time it goes around the table and gets back to you, it could be watermelon, it could be elephant. It's very easy for language to be distorted. That's why for the Jews, there's an expression in the Talmud, they loved letters. They fell in love with letters because they wanted to preserve its integrity and its sanctity. So you know that every Sabbath and 3 times a week in the synagogue, the Torah scroll is taken out and it's read. Every letter is precise. A Sefer Torah, which is the Torah scroll, the written Torah, needs to be handwritten. You can't do it from a copy machine. You can't do it by fax. It has to be written and compared to a Torah before it, because it was vital from the time of Moses till today. There's no Torah scroll that was not handwritten, copied by a Torah scroll before it, because they were concerned with forgeries and concerned with distortions. Even if it wasn't deliberate, it's so easy to make mistakes. So do you know that I can tell you, how many letters there are in a Torah scroll? 304,805. Everyone who ever studied in a school in yeshiva will know that, because every letter is accounted for. That way, if someone ever adds a letter or subtracts, Yeah. The same with the pronunciation. So though a lot was lost, but there was also preserved, because they all knew that if we don't preserve the language, we can't preserve the ideas. How do we know that what we're studying today is similar to what Isaac Luria studied, or going back to Moses almost 3,300 years ago? So language was preserved, and though there are different vernaculars and there are different accents, there's Sephardic accent, there's Ashkenazic, and there are times where certain words have different pronunciations, but overall, this was preserved, and therefore it was not lost or forgotten. However, you need to study it again with a master. I'll give you a simple example. A Torah scroll does not have vowels. It only has letters.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, it says in the Bible, famous verse, there was evening and there was morning and there was one day, and God said it was good. How do you, in Hebrew, the word for evening is erev. The word for morning is boker, like boker tov.
Mm-hmm.
Now, but if you don't know how to pronounce it, the word erev could also be pronounced arev, which means wild animals. It could also be arav, which means sweetness. So the same three letters can have three different meanings. When boker could also mean cattle. So you can say there were wild animals and cattle, but obviously it doesn't make any sense in that verse. But there we could figure it out because it's no context. But there are many words, if you don't know, for example, as a matter of fact, talk about Christianity, one of the words that they distorted was a word called the virgin, where the word means something else in Hebrew, but they either intentionally or not intentionally. So the point I'm making here is that there is an oral tradition that goes along with the pronunciation of the letters, that we read it Erev and Boker, not Arev and Boker.
Right.
So we know what it means. And this is an oral tradition that the real scholars and masters know by heart as they received it from those before us. Today, a lot of it is documented. But over the years, that's how it was preserved. Now, there were times, as I mentioned before, mistakes were made, but they were ultimately corrected because someone pointed out that something's not consistent. And remember, you're dealing with hundreds, thousands of scholars all over. So they are, each one is checking the other. So there's no one person that you could say that person was maybe biased or bribed or went off his mind or something.
Right. But I mean, that is why I would like to know all of, I am seeking that teacher, because the permutations themselves, how the letters can go into each other and spell different things and link up through other texts or through other words in the text. It's fascinating, but I'm always so worried about pronouncing things incorrectly, because eventually I do hope to understand some of the meditations and some of the ritual. And I'm worried that if you don't speak it correctly, it could be dangerous, or if you don't speak it correctly, it does.
So listen, it goes back. It goes back to the same thing. Knowledge is power. The only way to learn is to study, and to study with the right teachers.
Right.
And it's a process. I have no magic pill that I can tell you, take this and you'll master the language. It's a lifetime journey. I studied it since I'm a little child, and you continue studying it, and you always learn new things. And there's all interesting stuff, and there's very fascinating books on what's called Digduk, Hebrew language and Hebrew pronunciation, and Hebrew, as you put it, the gematria, and all the different permutations of whether it's the pronunciation. In Hebrew, the language of Hebrew is a metaphorical language, as opposed to, let's say, Latin languages like English. So in the sense where a word has a meaning, every letter has a meaning, every letter has a shape, has a number. So the letters are very spiritual. They're spiritual channels, actually, of energy.
It's beautiful. Honestly, I'm aware of these things, and it's why I want to study so badly. It's because I have not found anything like it anywhere else, in any other tradition, in any other school of thought. And Hebrew and the depth of it and how beautiful it is, it's just awe-inspiring. It blows my mind every time that I learn more about it. So do you have any books or any website or anything off the top of your head that could help with learning the language? Do you know, like, this teacher is better than this teacher?
Yeah, and just to add to that too, and speaking strictly about Hebrew and not Kabbalah, are there any online programs that you've found that can help someone get a good grasp of Hebrew without the need for a teacher? Or do you feel like a teacher is ineradicably necessary in that endeavor?
No, I think you could find some good programs. Look, a teacher is always useful because you have a personal connection.
Right.
But there are good programs. Honestly, offhand, I don't recall. I know there's a book called Letters of Light, I think, by Rabbi Raskin.
I've seen it online.
Yeah, I think Letters of Light is a good book. There's a book by Rabbi Ginsburg, also, I think the Hebrew, I don't remember the name, Rabbi Yitzchak Ginsburg, a Kabbalist in Israel. There are some good books on the Hebrew language. I would again, I have no problem after we finish this, I can have my team look into it, and we can come up with like a little bibliography of suggested readings or online programs that can help.
Perfect. Thank you. Wonderful.
In many ways, the language is easier than the Kabbalah, because Kabbalah has the whole mystical and
metaphysics.
esoteric dimension. Language is, you just want a legitimate program that teaches you both pronunciation, the different methodologies, how we use the words and letters and so on. But it's a study. It's fascinating.
It is.
Be happy. We can definitely look. It's a tremendous service because others have these questions as well. If we can list, here are some suggested links, some suggested readings, that would be great.
And we can post them in the description
we'll
as well.
Together.
Yep. We'll do that, yeah, because it's been a huge point of contention for me in studying. I'm a huge student of metaphysics and esotericism, and it's a big roadblock. You need to know the language, you must know it and respect it.
And I guess that leads us to our next question, which is, and I don't know if this is kind of from left field, but it seems today there's a lot of Orthodox Jews who don't speak Hebrew. Do you think how important do you think it is to be able to speak it to be a practicing Jew?
Yeah, at least for me in my personal experience, those who I meet who say, "Oh, I'm Jewish," or "Oh, my father's a rabbi," or "Oh, this or that," I'm like, "Oh, do you speak Hebrew?" Because I'm searching for someone to help me. Like, let's speak together. And like, "Oh, I don't speak it. I'm sorry." Usually they're female, but some men just don't. So I don't.
Yeah.
I don't.
That my answer to that is that this is a dilemma in some of the schools. But the decision was made. And that when you're teaching students, instead of having them need to struggle both with the content and the language, so many of the educators and authorities decided, let's teach it to them in a language they understand, let's say English. Mm-hmm. And therefore, many know the content well, though they may not know the language well. So that's part of the trade-off, because it can be sometimes too taxing and too challenging for a student, let's say a 7-year-old, or a 5-year-old, to study a language that they don't speak at home or in the street or with their friends. So obviously, the more you know the Hebrew language, the better it is.
Sure.
But there are people who are quite knowledgeable and they may not know Hebrew that well. I don't take that necessarily. Someone doesn't know Hebrew does not mean they don't have access. There's a lot of many good translations today, even if people don't know Hebrew well. And but obviously, like in any language, there are many people who, for example, don't know the original Latin, and yet we're quite educated. If you know the original, it helps, because there's something about the integrity of that's difficult to lost in translation, so to speak. But in our case, there are many, many good books in English and other languages that make things very accessible.
Yeah, Aryeh Kaplan, for instance, for sure, one of the best translations of the Sefer Yetzirah.
Absolutely.
You
just want to have a legitimate and authentic translation. That's the key. You don't want something that's obviously compromising or didn't
touched on the essence. Yeah, so that's good to know that there's not like a hatefulness for those who don't speak the language. If you have the knowledge, you have the knowledge, and that's okay. I think that's commendable. That's respectful.
Absolutely.
I think that's cool.
I think we have one more question about Hebrew.
Yeah, so in my study of the language, Hebrew stems from Aramaic, and there's some argument online in different communities whether or not Hebrew is the oldest language on earth, and that's not necessarily so important for me to know, or consensus to be held, where it's like, yes, Hebrew is older than, or Aramaic was older than Sanskrit or whatever. I just wanted to know if you had anything to say at all on the parallels between the Jewish oral teachings from times lost and other cultures, like at all. So I guess I'm conflating two questions. One is the language being super old. It does seem, when you put it up next to other cultures that are ancient, such as some of the Eastern, more Sanskrit-based language and culture, there is some overlap. Have you done any study on the perennial philosophy at all, or like, have you seen any overlap from what you've learned in your study of esotericism from Kabbalah with any other culture, or is it strictly like, has your study been strictly Kabbalistic?
Yeah. So I'll answer both questions. First, let's start with the language. According to the Bible, actually, in the 2nd chapter in the Bible, after the story of the flood, you have the story of the Tower of Babel. You're familiar with that story?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so it says that all nations spoke one language, and they came together to challenge God. So God did what? Yeah. He confused their languages.
Into 72.
And that's where, according to biblical thought, biblical teachings, the variety and diversity of languages was born out of that. According to Jewish tradition, the language was Hebrew. Everyone spoke Hebrew. And then then it diversified. Now, when you think about it, Hebrew, there are good books that do this, like Aleph, Beis, Gimel. The first 3 letters in the Hebrew alphabet are very similar to A, B, C, both in the sound. Aleph, A, B, Bet is B, Gimel like C. So the truth is, Latin languages, there's no question they can be traced to Hebrew. The question is the Eastern ones, like Sanskrit, that you mentioned, and others. So I didn't do a thorough study, but I'm not surprised that perhaps right there and then, in those early years, talking about 4,000 years ago, that perhaps when the languages diversified, some took one shape, some took another. Hebrew definitely goes back very early. I don't know if you can prove exactly who was the first language, but according to Jewish tradition, Hebrew is the essential language.
Okay.
And that branched off into many other languages.
So
I never did for example, that's the Latin languages. For example, languages like Chinese or the Eastern languages, that would be interesting to see if there are any parallels. But I think studies have been done because remember, if all human beings go back to similar origins, what language did they speak in the beginning? That would be an interesting question.
Right. So that being said, is it agreed? So in Genesis, obviously, Hebrew is said to be the original language, right? Adam was charged with naming the creation, and it was Hebrew because he could see in things. But historical study tries to say something like Aramaic was the originator of Hebrew. So you would disagree with that?
Yeah, I would say Aramaic originated from Hebrew rather than the other way around.
Okay. Okay. That's good.
Now remember, Hebrew may have gone through shifts as well. It could be ancient Hebrew was somewhat different than modern Hebrew. So, like for example, an Aleph today is written with like a semicircle and a line. You go back to original Hebrew, it's more of a side triangle and a line. So you see there was an evolution of shapes and so on. So it really it's a little more complicated than we can cover here.
That
but
makes
there
sense,
are some
though.
good books that show you the evolution of Hebrew and this association with other languages. I'd have to look up. I saw one great book I was very fascinated with. It was very well documented. It took many languages and showed their origins and how they evolved. So I don't know if it accounts for every possible language, but quite a few. I want to answer your second question. I actually did do studies. There are many, many parallels between Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, and Eastern mysticism. But that's not a surprise, because when you go think about it, Abraham, who was the progenitor, the ancestor of all of us, because Abraham had a son, Yishmael, who later would become the ancestor of the Arab Muslim world. He had a grandson, Esav, who would become the ancestor of the Roman Western Christian world. So if you go back, the early mystics like Abraham, who weren't even yet Jewish, there was no Jewish yet, really taught their children mystical ideas. So it's not surprising that their children traveled around the world and brought these teachings with them, whether it was to the east or the west or the north or the south. So truths emerged in many places. You'll find tremendous parallels between different schools of mysticism, between Sufism, Buddhism, Kabbalah, mysticism, Jewish mysticism,
Taoism.
And at the end of the day, these are spiritual truths that were either passed on or human beings who are very soulful came to resonate with them. It's like music. You can play music that touches you, and you suddenly go to a tribe in Africa, and they'll be touched by that music, and they have a variation of it themselves.
So I buy into that. I definitely believe that to be the case. This singular universal truth, this universal language that may or may not have taken form in different ways because human beings are fallible, and we got all scrambled up after the Babel incident and things. That leads me to a quick question, which. I lost it. I lost it. Let it go.
It'll come to you.
It will. It's so. Oh man. Oh no. It's so important. we can move on, and if I remember, I'll ask.
You'll remember. You'll remember.
It'll come to you. We have a couple questions just relating to Judaism in general. One question that I was really interested in is, first of all, I had heard a story that rabbis will often deny people who want to become practicing Jews 3 times before they admit them in. Do you encourage people who are interested in Judaism to become Orthodox? And do you have any comment on, how the Jewish community as a whole feels about welcoming outsiders?
It actually, interestingly, it is correct, but the reason for it will surprise you.
Okay.
Because the Jewish belief is the following: God created all human beings, Jews and non-Jews, and you have a complete relationship with God, whoever you are. You don't need to be Jewish to have a relationship with God.
Right.
That's why Jews never proselytized. Christians and Muslims were always driven by converting others because whatever reason, I'm not going to go analyze it. but the Jews never felt the need for it, because the opposite. If a non-Jew wants to have a relationship with God, by all means, God is there for you. So the Jews felt there was no need. Why do you need to change your spiritual status to relate to God? It's like almost condescending, saying you need to be Jewish to connect to God. So that was the reason that when someone said, I like Judaism. So the Jews would always, not only 3 times, as much as possible, try to dissuade. You don't need it. Why are you going for it? Now, if a person insists, and if it's even irrational, they insist and they say, you know what? I still want to be Jewish. I don't care. And they keep pushing. Then the rabbis recognize there must be a deeper voice and a higher calling of this person. That's the way it's understood. It's not because it's a private club and we don't want you in our club. It's the contrary. Right. It's because you can connect to God perfectly as you are. I always share this with people and they're quite shocked. They say, really? I always thought it was because you thought you were superior or chosen.
It's almost backwards. It's like you don't want them to suffer. It's like, hey, being a Jew takes a lot of you. There's a lot you have to do.
Well,
exactly. And there's no reason you have a complete relationship with God. You can be perfectly fine where you are. Now, there's some people, as I said, insist. You also want to make sure that people are not converting for other reasons. For example, I want to marry this person. She won't marry me unless I convert. And then you say, do you really want to convert, or it's only because of her or because of him? So you have to also want to be authentic. You don't want to, it's not a game.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I like the club metaphor. It's almost like you're saying that we're all actually part of the same club, but Judaism is like a subset of the club that we're all part of, which is the club that is, connected to God.
Well, the truth is every human being is connected to God if they wish to be, not just the Jew. And this is, so unfortunately, there are people who behave in a more partisan way. I'm a universalist. God created all human beings in the divine image. The fact that some are men and some are women, the fact that some are Jews, some are non-Jews, some are priests and some are Levites and some are Israelites, some are scholars and some are lay people. That's the beauty and the diversity of the human race. That does not mean that one is better or closer to God than another.
Right. So this conversation actually sparked the question. I'll hold it until we get to the end of the rounds of questioning. That being said, though, Jews do believe that there were covenants made, right? That the Jewish people have been chosen by God. And can you explain a little bit of what, for the audience who maybe have never heard of what this covenant is, or like what it is, why the Jews are, you're saying that they're not special, like everyone has a connection with God, but the Jews are meant to do something very specific. The Jews were chosen for something. What is
fair
that?
question. It's a good question. So let me clarify, because the chosen people topic has always been one that many people misunderstand and can actually irk someone as well. Remember this: nothing on earth exists by accident. So everything was chosen and everyone was chosen. Let's start with that.
Okay.
If you were chosen to be a Gentile, or born in India, or born in China, or born in Asia, or born here, or born there, or you were chosen to be born black or Hispanic or white, God chose you. So we're all chosen. Let's make that clear. The question is, chosen for what?
Exactly.
And what are you doing about it? Remember, wasn't God just suddenly picked out a few people and said, I'm choosing you? Abraham paid a heavy price to connect to God. He lived in a pagan world and he rejected paganism. He rejected self-worship. He recognized there's a higher presence. So as a result of that, God saw, oh, you're committed to me, I'll be committed to you. So Abraham, due to his effort, not just God plucked him out of nowhere.
Right.
He made an effort, so God responded. It's like you date someone. If someone doesn't want to marry you, you're not going to marry them.
Right.
Now, the nations of the world at the time actually were offered the Torah, the Talmud tells us, and they didn't want it. They said, we're not ready to be controlled by the laws of, let's say, sexuality. We want to sleep with whoever we want to sleep with, or the laws of war, or the laws of theft and property. So it's more complicated than just, oh, God just chose the.
Right.
So what happened was a covenant is created all the time. If I speak to many non-Jewish audiences, and I say, if you right now make a choice that you want to have a relationship with God, but not just words, not lip service, you are going to live your life. You're going to pay the price to be just, to be virtuous. And it's a price. We know we live in a world where there's a lot of corruption, and you will not succumb to being corrupt, even though everyone around you is corrupt. If you make that choice, God says, I will sanctify you. You will have a relationship with me. The Jewish people collectively made such a choice, and that caused the covenant to take place. But this does not preclude others from having a relationship with God.
Right.
Fine, it's not the Jewish relationship. That's one point I want to make.
Yeah.
The second point is that the Jewish people became, in a way, like the teachers, the people of the book. I know Pastor Hagee. He's a very famous Christian pastor, and he says again and again, he says, the Jews, we have a debt of gratitude to them, because when all others were not willing to accept the law of God, the Jews did, and they taught it to us. So we see them as our teachers.
Right.
So when Jews are living up to their destiny, in a way, they're like teachers. They're like, if you want, you can call them the witnesses. They're witnesses to history. And perhaps that's one of the roles of the Jews. But I don't see that as exclusive in the sense, oh, and the rest of you are second class. It's just the way it is that history evolved. And now all people in the world have that choice to become godly and divine.
So my follow-up question to that, though, is because you had said that, everybody can have a relationship with God regardless of whether or not they're a practicing Jew or not. But at the same token, there's also all these rituals and ceremonies and philosophies and practices instantiated in the Judaic practice. So do you believe someone can be as close to God as somebody who is practicing those things if they're not?
I suppose to add on is, go ahead.
Yeah, because closeness to God is not defined by a country club standards.
Gotcha.
It's not like you sit closer to the front of the room or something. Closeness to God means that you are living up to your destiny. I'll just share a short little story. There was a great Hasidic rabbi. He was sitting in a corner crying. And they asked, why are you crying? He says, I'm crying not because I'm not living up to what Moses was like or what Abraham was like. I'm crying whether I'm living up to what Zusha, that was his name, whether I'm living up to my potential. So from the perspective is, God wants everyone to have a relationship with God based on their status. We don't need to copy someone else. We don't need to be someone else. So it really comes down to different roles. Remember, from God's point of view, there's no superiority and inferiority. There's just different roles. And when you look at it that way, like I said, I'm a teacher and a scholar. Does that make me superior to my students? No, that happens to be my role. My role is I'm able to teach, and that's what I do.
Right.
So everybody has to find their calling, and it's not a competition. That's my response to that.
And you would say the role of the student is equally as important as your role as the scholar.
As a matter of fact, it may even be more important at times because a student elicits certain wisdom that a teacher doesn't.
And teachers learn, as a good teacher will learn from a student just as much as a student from the teacher. And it's all a good process. It's all about balance, right? Exactly. Just like Kabbalah teaches balance, right? Balance.
Look, we're right now on this program together. I know more than you do about Kabbalah and Judaism because I studied it. But I don't see myself as somewhat greater than you. In this area, I'm great. But you may be able to bring the message to millions of people that I don't do. So you have your role. I see it as a partnership.
Exactly. Everything has its place, because it's all
think of it. I love the analogy of music, an orchestra. So you have someone playing the flute, someone the harp, the violins, the piano, everyone is necessary and indispensable in their role, and the symphony is only possible if everyone's doing their job and everyone complements the other.
And
bottom line, we got to get our ego and control out of this picture.
Exactly.
It's not about control and power.
Right.
So I agree with everything that you've said. I love that the universalist aspect of your outlook on the world. That being said, the question is, in my study of what Kabbalah teaches, in the upper realms and the higher realms, there is no good or evil. Good or evil only exists in the lower. And it all has a purpose, and it's all important. It's not like it's a mistake or anything like that. But do you also see those who embody evil in that light in some way, shape, or form? There's like, do you see them in that same way, or do you
as having some utility?
Right.
Yeah. It's
like a personal question here. Because for me personally, I will often try to give that grace to people. Just say everyone's on their path, including the ones who are on the wrong path, and it'll all in the end reconcile, and everybody will go back to. In the end, everything is good. And that doesn't mean that we should say, okay, we're not going to try to stop that evil over there, or okay, we're not promoting that evil over there. But in your worldview, do you feel something similar?
Okay, so firstly, let me say, I have a book called Toward a Meaningful Life. It's not strictly literal Kabbalah, but it's Kabbalistic ideas. Mm-hmm. I have a chapter there on good and evil. I recommend you read it, or anyone listening to this should read that, because I give a good synopsis of the Jewish mystical view on good and evil. Let me say 2 points. First of all, the root of good and evil above, as you put it, is concealment and revelation. Mm-hmm. If, for example, God conceals himself from us, like a father is playing a game with his children and he hides in order to elicit their ingenuity to find the father, but they give up. They say, you know what? I think he's not here any longer. So essentially, evil is a misunderstood concealment, if you wish. Mm-hmm. And so therefore, what happens is you give up and you say, you know what? There is no God. There's no God. I can do whatever I like. I don't have to answer to a higher authority. I don't have to answer to others. And then selfishness comes into play. That's the roots of it. Then it comes to a point where a person can be deliberately evil and destructive. So here's the thing I want to say. Yes, we believe firmly that goodness is more powerful than evil. And the essence of every human being and reality is good, not evil. But at the same time, we don't see evil as an illusion. Like, for example, Gandhi, some of the Buddhist approach, that there's no such thing as evil. We know that is not the case. You have people who are right now destructive. When you see a molester, a rapist, a Hitler, doing something, we don't say, oh, you know what, it's just distorted concealment. We are accountable. Because I love you, I would hold you accountable if you did something wrong. Now, if it was a mistake or you didn't know, that's another discussion. Right. But so therefore, we absolutely see that a person, so even though it's rooted, if God had not concealed himself, there couldn't have been a potential for evil in the first place. But once there is a concealment, you and I are responsible to live up to our higher good. Right. Now, to answer the last point of this, ultimately, yes, we work, even a criminal in prison, the person is in prison because they're destructive to others. You can't leave them out in the street. Someone running around with a knife or a gun, you can't just say, oh, it's all really good. It's not. The person can hurt others. But at the same time, we pray and hope for the day where that person will come to recognize that that's not really them, and they will repent, and they will return, and they will transform even a negative into a positive. No, people who've done very destructive things and later not only had remorse, but they turned it into an asset where they learned from their mistakes. They've actually helping others now. I know many people in recovery where raving lunatics or addicts are now helping other people heal. So it's a process that we all have to go through.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's whenever I try to talk about my own personal philosophy on the nature of good and evil, it's exactly very similar to that, where at the root of all things, it's only good, but there is bad after, as Kabbalah would call the concealment, and we are responsible. So thank you for putting that into perspective for our audience and for everyone who's watching or listening. Do you have anything that you could say on double concealment? I know this idea of double concealment is a very intricate topic. And so what, there's the first concealment that you talked about, and then there's a double concealment.
The Baal Shem Tov, actually, you mentioned him earlier, the great mystic, the Baal Shem Tov. 18th century mystic, who was the founder of Hasidic movement. There's a verse in the book of Deuteronomy that says, and I, on that day, will conceal myself, a double concealment. I will conceal and conceal my face. So he explains something fascinating. There's a concealment where we know it's concealed. Like right now, we know it's dark outside, at least here in my part of the world. But then imagine you don't think it's dark. The darkness conceals the darkness, and you say, you know what? It's all bright. It's all great. You know, that is the double. That's, I'll use it psychological terms. It's called utter denial.
Right.
It's one thing saying, you know, I did something wrong, and I'm now going to repair it. Okay, so it's dark, but I'm going to bring light. But what happens if someone says it's not dark? Something wrong with you. You know, a parent hurts a child and says, I didn't do anything wrong, something wrong with you. That is far worse, because where do you find redemption? If someone doesn't even acknowledge there's a problem, then what do you do then? So that's why the double concealment can be quite challenging.
Yeah, it
that's
reminds
where, like I remember asking someone, do you have any blind spots? And he says, yes, but I know what they are. So I said, then it's not a blind spot.
right.
You know.
That's funny.
Okay.
Yeah, it reminds me of the use of the word subtle to describe the serpent in the Adam and Eve story. It's worse because you can't recognize it when you spot it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. That's why they say, for example, that the silence is worse than the rape.
Right.
Because the rape is a crime. But when you're quiet about it and you make believe nothing happened, it's all good. That is unforgivable, because what do you do then?
Conceal.
Nothing happened. It's like, hey.
It's doublethink. George Orwell's doublethink, Connor.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
you know something? One of my great master, teacher, mentor, Rabbi Schneerson, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the Rebbe, we call him, once said an interesting statement. I love this one. He says, everybody has flaws, but don't make a philosophy out of them. You know?
Right. Don't expound upon them.
It's good bit of wisdom. A couple more questions and we'll be at the end.
It's going well, my friends. I love talking to you.
Yeah, thank you. This
has been really fun so far. Thank you for indulging us. We really appreciate it.
So appreciative, honestly.
As long as that's such indulgences, I will always cooperate with.
Well, thank you. Well, we'll have to come back together after we've studied a bit more and we can talk a bit more in depth about certain things.
Absolutely. We'll do a part 2.
That'd be wonderful. So on the case, I'm going to bring it back on the case where we were speaking about Abraham. When I studied the history, not from a mystical position or a metaphorical position, but the actual events that occurred, were there a string of battles that Abraham had fought in and won? I've heard denigration for the Jewish faith, people trying to downplay it or talk crap about it or whatever, which I disagree with. But I've heard criticisms like, "Oh, your God is a God of war. Your God is just a destructive God. The Old Testament is this evil God," sort of like a Gnostic approach. And our New Testament God is this wonderful God. Do you have anything to talk about the history of what occurred when Abraham made that covenant with God and why?
Yeah, well, let me first of all react to that statement. I need to react.
Sure, please do.
I would challenge any person to point out in the last 3,000 years where the Jews were ever aggressors in any war. We've been victims, not aggressors. Yes. I find it to be absurd, and worse than that, I find it to be absolute nerve after 6 million Jews were slaughtered like sheep, not by Jews, by the Nazis, for anyone to even get up and say, did the Jews afterwards go take revenge? Did we go into Germany and blow up cafes and to claim that, listen, you stole 6 million of a third of our people, men, women, and 1.5 million innocent children? I would like anyone to bring up, show me, where's this God of war? If the Jews have a God of war, we should always be warriors. We should always be on the offense trying to conquer. Israel has only fought defensive wars, never offensive. The Arabs had accepted in 1948 the armistice, the vision that the UN established. There'd never been a war. So this is a complete distortion, and I just need to call it out. That Jews have never been warriors. We only went to war as defense, and even then as last resort. And as a matter of fact, Jews were accused of going to the like lambs to slaughter without fighting back, except the Warsaw Uprising. So I just want to make that statement. Regarding the Bible, yes, there are wars in the Bible. Abraham was a man of love. That's what the Bible says. He was a man that spread the word of kindness and justice. The people who challenge Judaism, they should thank the Jews that we have a world today that has a country like the United States and other countries that offer you that even who you are welcome and accepted, and justice and law prevails. This is our Jewish concept. So to selectively just choose the battles that are discussed in the Bible and forget about that the whole Jewish commitment was to live a life of peace and justice and virtue and kindness and generosity is like such a distortion. Now, the battles that were fought were battles, but they were not aggressive battles that were just going to war because we're warriors. I would like you to show me which Jew has this warlike attitude. Jews are not known to be warriors. They're actually known to be more intellectuals and actually more pacifist, if anything.
Right. And you had said earlier, too, that a lot of the Judaic philosophies and principles are so embedded into our culture and have been culturally reinforced for so long that we've actually forgotten the origin. Is that kind of frustrating as a practicing Jew?
It's frustrating, but I understand it. First of all, there's a certain anti-Semitic dimension in the culture. I don't know where it comes from, whether it's due to the Christ killer image that the Jews killed Christ, or it was fed by anti-Semites who were looking for a convenient scapegoat. Right. I can analyze it to death
all day.
So of course it's frustrating when you see, I know what I'm committed to. I speak to Jews and non-Jews. I don't make any distinction. To me, it's about God's children and bringing God's message to everyone of kindness and generosity. So it's frustrating when you don't, not only are not appreciated for what you're trying to do, but also distorting as if the Jews are the problem or something.
Right.
Now, I'll be first to admit there are corrupt Jews, just like there are corrupt non-Jews.
People.
Right.
I didn't say there are no Jews that did not abuse and are not corrupt and have been done things that are wrong that I'm embarrassed of. I'm not embarrassed. I'm not going to tell you that's not the case, but that's not the Jewish standard.
Right. That's not
what we're taught. That's not what the Bible teaches. You read it, the Bible's all about one thing: being charitable, giving. Civil justice, social justice is all a biblical concept.
Indeed. Well, thank you for that. And it's totally okay that you are passionate about that. I think it's totally warranted. So it's okay if you fly off the handles. And
at times you need to be indignant, right?
Yes.
There's a time for everything. It's Geburah, right?
No. I didn't have a tantrum. I hope you don't realize it's not a tantrum.
No,
I just wanted to convey the point.
Not at all. I didn't think I
didn't lose it.
No, you didn't. No. I didn't see the vein pop on your head. So you've said, all people have connection with God. All people, you don't have to be Jew in order to have that connection. You've kind of explained a little bit about the role of a Jew in the world as you see yourself. And the nuances there and the differences there. There is one question that will sound a little bit bitter as I say it. I don't intend it to be that way at all.
Don't worry about it.
Okay. I was watching a series of videos where someone went to Israel and were speaking with some of the Jews there. And they were asking them questions on their opinion on the nature of the coming Messiah, right? And some of the questions were this and that and this and that. When do you think the Messiah will come? It's the consensus that the Messiah will come when the whole world wants to study, the Torah, and everyone wants to study Kabbalah, and everyone wants to know the truth and understand. And the question was asked, my question is that there's a consensus of some sort in which the idea is the Messiah will appear when the whole world or the majority of the world wants to be like a servant to the Jew, is what the question was. The question was when all of the Gentiles want to be a servant to the Jews, then the Messiah will appear. Is that radical to you, or is that a pretty standard opinion on like messianic future? Like,
or maybe is it more being a servant to the Judaic principles?
Right, and it's okay. Like, I am not meaning to come off in any type of way. It's just I want to understand maybe there's like a language difference, or maybe it's literally that. Maybe because as a person of Jewish culture, you understand that you are the teacher. You have these wisdoms and a soundness of mind and character. And when the whole world turns to that, then it's like, okay, now the Messiah appears. I understand that, but I'm just trying to ask for more context.
Yeah, I will give you context. So a little what you just said about Judaic principles, but let me put it in my own words. I think language is vital here. It's very repulsive to hear that when you will be my servant, that's when the Messiah will come.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk about what the word servant means. The real statement is this: when all of us will be servants of God, that's when the Messiah will come. It's not about serving Jews; it's serving God. The Jewish people are. It says God in the Bible. It says, "You are my servants, not the servants of my servants." In other words, it's all about serving a higher purpose. It's not about one human being serving another human being. No,
right.
That's not the case. It's about what the Hasidic language called bittul, a certain selflessness, suspension of self. That's really the significance and the meaning.
Right.
Unfortunately, there are Jews, and maybe non-Jews as well, that take it literally, and they think, well, you'll be my cleaning lady, or you'll be my chauffeur. No, that's not quite.
Right.
Look, everybody has roles. When even among the Jews, for example, the Levites wash the hands of the priests. So you could say they're serving them, but it's not a service like in the sense of I'm your servant. We're both doing the role under God's rules. It's just like, I told somebody once, they were in my house and we were diapering a child. I was diapering my little baby. So I said, I serve my baby. I have to diaper him. So
that's true.
But it's coming from love. I don't feel like a service. It feels
right.
I don't mean it quite that way. I mean to say,
I understand.
It's about commitment rather than the word servant to be the right word. Commitment.
Almost like a mutual love, like a mutual understanding, a mutual respect.
Right. And remember, we live in a world where everything is so defined by social classes. Like going back even to the principles of capitalism and democracy. They're the proletariat, there's the bourgeois, they're the privileged, the less privileged. Look, there are wealthy people today who have 1,000 servants, doing everything. In a way, it repulses us because why? You're better than I am just because you have more money. So I think we have to get out of that mode, that mindset of that I'm greater than you are. Right. That's not the case. As a matter of fact, just an interesting statement. God says to Moses, "I have given you greatness, but not for you to be great, for you to serve the people." I've given you greatness to serve. So it's actually the leader that's the servant, not the
in the correct way. Which I think that's where I got the idea. Whoever was speaking about Kabbalah being giving and receiving is probably where that notion came from.
That's good.
It's like in the reception you give back, and that's how I understood it.
Yeah, absolutely. So like the moonlight, the moon reflects the sun. But in the process, it reveals a whole different dimension of light. Like I always tell people, you see two people in love, they stare at the moon, not at the sun,
Yeah, exactly. Right.
While we're talking about, the return of the Messiah and the day and age where everybody will be truth seekers and want to be servants of God, you had said earlier something that I found interesting. You had said that the world.
By the way, the Jews won't say the return of the Messiah.
Right. It's
they will say the coming of the Messiah.
I'm sorry. Correction. My bad. But you had said that the world is becoming more refined, and I don't believe you used the word better, but I felt like you had kind of alluded to that. Do you feel like there are more people today who are truth seekers, who want to be servants of God, who are interested in the Torah than there once were in a time that antedates us?
Absolutely. Steven Pinker of Harvard.
Yes, very familiar.
Got some of his books.
So look at it, and he's not speaking from a godly point of view at all.
Right.
He speaks as an atheist, a Jewish atheist. He speaks in terms of the Enlightenment. He has tremendous statistics that show the trajectory of war, violence, crime going like this. I mean, there's no question. I'm not denying there's still problems. We got plenty of problems in our society. But if you compare it, I mean, the last 100 years, especially after World War II, we are definitely a more peaceful and kinder world. That still doesn't mean we don't have criminals. We have people who are murderers and rapists and killers and so on. We still have that. But if you look at the picture, especially like the full picture, there's no question the world is a better refined place. Individually, yes, I think that due to technology and due to the comforts of our lives, it's a double-edged sword. On one hand, that's brought out the worst in us because we got spoiled
Yeah.
and we got so comfortable and we take for granted our gifts. So we
Right.
don't fight for values.
Right.
But on the other hand, I do see a very deep hunger. I could tell you in this last year, COVID, I have seen a vulnerability and a receptivity to what I do, teaching spiritual ideas like never before. I'm in overdrive. I've never done so much, and I've never had so many people listening. So I think there's a deep hunger. The thing is, like you said before about double darkness, people don't even know what they're hungry for.
Right.
They know things are not working. Like I meet a lot of people who tell me, I don't know what it is. Something's missing. I want love in my life. I'm not having a healthy relationship with people are craving for some intimacy,
But they have no
for
idea.
some love,
No
for
direction.
nurturing. It really comes down to the basics. Like, a child needs love. Many of us are starving for unconditional love.
Right.
And we're looking for it. And we look sometimes in the wrong places. We try to fill the void with all kinds of stuff, whether it's drugs or alcohol or gambling or sex
Or people.
things that
other
try
people.
to relieve our pain. So I really feel there's a tremendous hunger. Many don't know what they're hungry for. And that's why I'm really big believer in what we're doing right now, because
Yes.
you never know who's going to be listening to this.
Absolutely.
And you can save a life. You could save many
Yeah.
lives. So
I-
I say that sincerely to you. That to me, that is worth everything, because that's the purpose of technology, is to bring a soulful message to the world.
Yes.
It's not about playing games and social networks and so on, and it's business. That's nice, but above all, it's connecting.
I feel that love. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's love.
It feels so good to hear that from you. Thank you.
Look, they call today addictions, they call it attachment disorders. You want to be attached to something, but you don't know where to find that attachment.
Right.
And that's what we're looking for. We're craving for connection
Right. Connection with others, cleaving to God, all of it.
to something more than material needs and instant gratification.
Right, which to go back to the beginning, a couple of the beginning questions, that's part of the reason why I think the rule set emerged for people to need to be 40 years old and have a family and be a practicing Jew and all of these things, because it's like you learn through the stages of the vegetable world and the animal world, the human world, the spiritual world, all of the metaphors for the needs the things that we think we want and we chase, and then we learn and we grow from that. And there are some individuals who are more spiritually inclined than others at younger ages, but for the most part, it seems exactly that way, that everyone's hungry.
That's true, but I want to just qualify that. There's an analogy from the Alter Rebbe, Rab Shneur Zalman of Liadi. You may have heard of him. He was a student of the Baal Shem Tov. He said that when a child is sick and he's on his deathbed, and the king is told the only way to save the child maybe is to take your most precious stone of your crown and crush it and dissolve it in water, and maybe that will save the child. And the king says immediately, yes. So he's saying, because of our times, we can't always wait till everybody's ready.
Mhm.
Sometimes you need to reveal the deepest secrets, because it may save that one child that is not yet ready. So though there are the conditions you mentioned, 40 years old and being in a healthy place, but today the fact of the matter is some of these teachings need to be shared because people are desperate, and that may be the lifesaver.
So that is one of the final questions. I was just going to ask, we've spoken about, again, and I digressed from it a moment ago, so I'm sorry. I'll bring it back. The question is exactly, you said all people can have a connection with God. You don't have to be Jewish. You explained all the nuances there. And the reason why I want to study the language, and I'm so adamant about learning how to pronounce the words correctly and how to truly understanding as much as I can without a teacher. I'm searching for a teacher, but is to eventually one day potentially actually practice, to do the meditations, to try to literally interface with God in this mystical sense. And I have had experiences in my life, many of them in my short, young adult life, but I want it to be authentic. And as I study again, and I look at all of the options out there, Kabbalah, Judaism seems in my heart to be as close to truth as you can get in any of these other areas. And my question is, what you just said, everyone's hungry, regardless of the risks, we should give it to the world, was the mentality, because it's bad right now, and the sooner we give it to more people, the better. Yeah, some people might damage themselves or damage others, but I think we think in the grand scheme of everything, it'll be worth it. So my question is, how do you feel about non-Jews trying or attempting to actually do the meditations, to actually, climb the tree of life, to actually go through the motions and go through the gates and all of the motions? Do you truly feel like you need like protection, like a Jewish like covenant for protection, or can you do the ritual and the practice as a Gentile? How do you feel like that? And I might, if it's an uncomfortable question, I don't have to include this in the live video stream. This is really just for me.
No, I'm perfectly fine. My answer is very straightforward. The spiritual meditations and the spiritual journey, absolutely. Every human being on earth, Jew or non-Jew, should pursue it. I only recommend for everybody to find the right ones, do it authentically. You don't want to do something that's distorted or something fake. But absolutely, the actual rituals, that already comes down to different people based on what their needs are. For example, there are certain Jewish laws, rituals, that a non-Jew doesn't have to do. Just like there are certain laws that a man does and a woman doesn't do, or a woman does and a man doesn't do. So that's already the specifics. But the general spiritual meditations and that journey of the tree of life, by all means, I'll even quote a verse in Isaiah that says that in the future, which is we're coming to very imminently, it says like this: there will be no more evil and destruction, because the world will be filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. Maimonides says that the business of the world will be nothing but to know God. And this is for all people, Jews and non-Jews. So
that's when the Messiah comes.
Knowing and having an intimate connection, intimate communion and connection to God through study, through prayer, through actions. I call it the spiritual spa, study, prayer, action, SPA. So study, cognitive conditioning, emotional conditioning, and behavioral conditioning, by all means. This is what I do, actually. I teach. Now, yes, I teach Jews. And I also teach people universal ideas.
Thank you.
So that's how I see it. Now, of course, there are certain things that are more specific, like Passover is coming.
Right.
Passover is a Jewish holiday. But there are universal messages in Passover about freedom and transcendence and ego and transcendence of ego that are universal.
Right.
And there's no contradiction. I wouldn't.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say go encourage a non-Jew to be at a Seder, because that may not be the way, but there are many other ways to celebrate the holiday and celebrate its.
So I guess one of the things that I was thinking of when I first started studying a long time ago, and I've forgotten all about it, hasn't even crossed my mind until just now. One of the reasons was, thinking of like the circumcision of the mouth, of the tongue, and like the actual circumcision, and like the seated position. I think it was the Ari that invented it, where you would have to sit in the position and do the permutations spoken of in the Sefer Yetzirah. And I understand reality from a metaphysical standpoint, talk about it often, for, like the higher and the lower, all things are interconnected. Nothing exists on one level that doesn't exist in all of the other levels. And everything is emanations, permutations of the oneness of God, is the way I view the world. And of course it's nuanced and much more detailed than that, but that's the gist of it. I'm sure you understand where I'm coming from. One thing I was always worried about in the very beginning, why I wanted to study authentically, is because it's like, I understand that these things in the physical reality, these small rituals, these small gestures, these gatherings of people, from an exoteric perspective, you might just say, oh, that's just this thing, but there are always interconnected parts, right? You like Pardes, for instance. You get to the sod, you get to the end of it, to the secrets, but it's all connected. And part of me feels like you must go through these rituals, you must say the words, you must actually perform the rites in order to obtain that level of connection, that it's not just something that can be done through willfulness, that like you must do the things. And I'm wanting to ask you how you feel about that. Is that the case? Or do you feel like you can attain the same level that a Jew can through the meditations without?
It's case by case, because, for example, there's a ritual that the priestly blessing is said by the priests as they bless the people during holidays or the Sabbath. I'm not a priest. I don't say that ritual. So I don't see that as missing. It means I have other rituals. So I think it's case by case. I think that Jews, non-Jews, can also follow certain rituals.
Okay.
You just have to determine what they are.
Right.
You know, giving charity is also a ritual. There's other rituals that perhaps are more Jewish oriented, but that's already a more detailed discussion. The bottom line is whatever ritual it is, they're all paths to God.
Right.
Right.
We're not talking about being deprived.
Okay.
We're talking about sometimes it's a meditation, but it could be a prayer. It could be an act. There are many, many ways that and there are rituals that we ourselves embrace. So that would really be a more nuanced conversation about the Shabbat, kosher, tefillin, putting on the phylacteries, or other mitzvahs, other rituals, and who, so to speak, it works with and who it doesn't. When a woman is not supposed to put on tefillin, it's not because she's deprived, it's because she herself is tefillin. On Shabbat, you don't put on tefillin, because you don't need Shabbat. In other words, there are many ways. Nobody is lacking. Everybody has their path. And it's really about finding the path, which includes rituals and meditations and a combination of all of the above.
I think that's a good answer.
Perhaps
one day you will indulge me in a more detailed conversation on some of these things.
No, it's a perfectly legitimate. I'm happy to do so. You know, I deal with many people. I just today was on a call with someone from Kansas who's asking me, they're not Jewish. They say they love my classes. They say, what rituals can they do? So we came up with a whole list. I gave them a whole bunch of suggestions, and it's very good.
I'd be interested in that too, because it's like, you know, Carl Jung once said that to beware of wisdom that you did not earn. So I don't want to embark on anything that could potentially damage me. And it would be nice to know what rituals are acceptable for a Jew versus for a non-Jew.
By all means, I think it deserves its own conversation. It's not a 2 minutes.
Absolutely.
Right.
No. That would be something.
You know what? The hope here is that our conversation here should evoke interest in more.
Oh, yeah.
So we do more.
Indeed.
Absolutely.
And it has very much. I greatly appreciate you and all of your wisdom and all of your knowledge coming on and indulging us, talking with non-Jews. When I told some of my friends who are Jewish that we were going to speak with a rabbi, which we have spoken with a few rabbis before, but none who have such a grasp of Kabbalah and Kabbalistic principles as you. When we said that we were going to have a rabbi on, they were like, oh, I'm surprised that they're actually giving you the time of day. And I'm like, oh, and you were just full of light and love. So thank you so much.
Yeah, this was awesome. Thank you so much for talking to us. And it was very insightful, truly. That's an understatement, but thank you.
I very much appreciate talking to you. I like the candid conversation, open. And I'm a person, by the way, there's no question off limits. I deal with many taboo issues and that people are afraid to talk about. I'm not concerned. I believe very much open conversation.
Yes.
And it's all coming from love, as you put it. I have no judgment in me. I am a believer that we are all created in the divine image, and we have a sanctity, a dignity to life, no matter who a person is. And I never judge people based on their religion, faith, or lack of their. Interestingly, some people call me the rabbi of atheists because atheists like me, because I don't have an issue with someone speaking heresy. Well, you know, I'm a skeptic myself. I know the questions. I know the strengths and weaknesses. And I'm not here to, I don't believe in dogma. I believe in resonating truths that we share in a loving way. And we're not here to convert anyone or persuade anyone. We share, and hopefully it will resonate and it will ring true. And we'll have a ripple effect across this planet.
Indeed. Yeah.
We sure can use it in this polarized environment.
That is the entire basis of our entire channel. Like the whole goal of everything we're trying to achieve is ultimately to shed light, to enlighten others, as well as learning in the same process, and trying to resolve this polarization, trying to bring people back together, you know, just trying to
the best way is to bring light. Light dispels darkness. You can't go fight darkness with darkness. It doesn't work.
Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. Thank you. I've learned a lot today. Very much looking forward to a part 2. I know you're probably very, very busy. I have a lot more questions that are more detail oriented. I wanted to keep it kind of general, kind of like on the surface. Right. But whenever it's convenient for you, maybe in a month or so, we can.
Yeah, just email us and we'll do it.
Perfect. And then once this is edited and posted up, I will share it with Avital. And then if you would,
and I love it. You guys are in Boise, Idaho. I'm in New York.
Perfect.
Technology. You could be Antarctica. Beautiful. You could be on the moon for all that we know.
Exactly.
And that's amazing.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Simon Jacobson. And we appreciate you and much love. Thank you so much.
Much love to you. Be well, guys.
Be well.